Hello and welcome back to the Mission Possible, sofa. It's supposed to be a sofa, but we replaced it with three chairs because we have, not one, not two, but three guests here with us for the Mission Possible interview this afternoon. So from left to right, we have Victoria Burrows, who is the project manager for advancing net zero at the World Green Building Council. And we've got Martin Gettings here, who's the group head of sustainability at Canary Wharf Group. And here we have Dorothy Maxwell, who's the head of sustainability at House of Fraser. So hello, welcome along. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So the reason we brought you here together is because you're all featuring on stage actually later on this afternoon in a chat over on the Energy Innovation Theatre, and that's going to be discussing green buildings. So the specific title, I think, is Making Net Zero the New Normal. So Victoria, you're chairing that discussion. It's a big one to be chairing.
Yes.
Some really big businesses involved. I mean, what are you hoping to get from it?
Well, so our project, Advancing Net Zero, brings green building councils together around a global issue that's affecting us. And we feel that in order to meet the Paris Agreement targets, we need to be not talking about just green buildings anymore, but net zero carbon buildings, and working to do what we can to decarbonise the global built environment. And through our project, Advancing Net Zero, the green building councils are developing tools and identifying action pathways that might be through corporate engagement or policy engagement, or indeed developing certification schemes to help industry leaders to deliver against those targets and hopefully achieve a net zero carbon future.
Yeah, okay, so a bold overarching aim then. It's a big discussion to be having. So this topic's really pertinent, particularly for the Mission Possible campaign. The built environment is one of our key campaign pillars. We published a report just this week on edie, the Mission Possible report. Within that, we included a survey of 200 sustainability professionals, heads of, and we asked them about their kind of net zero building ambitions, and 78.5 to be specific percent of respondents said that they believe their buildings will all be net zero carbon by 2050, in line with the World Green Building Council's aim. So Martin, Dorothy, I'm putting you on the spot here, but would you have ticked yes to that? Do you think that you would that you're going to have net zero carbon buildings by 2050?
Yeah, whether we would have ticked yes or no, we've got to tick yes is the answer. I think the sooner we all sort of get on this zero carbon trajectory, the better. And we've started that by looking at science-based targets and looking at what we have to do to bring our operations and our activities in line with the long-term zero carbon trajectory. Just want to pick up on a point that Victoria said in terms of zero carbon buildings. And yes, it's absolutely about zero carbon buildings, but it's also about the bits in between the buildings and the next buildings. And at Canary Wharf, we've got the benefit of having a little piece of city state. And I think what we need to do is not just be thinking in terms of zero carbon buildings, but zero carbon communities and zero carbon cities. And I think that's something I'd like to get out of the session this afternoon.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. And Dorothy, what does this net zero carbon mean for House of Fraser?
Yeah, so in terms of House of Fraser, I think for a lot of heritage retailers, you have very old estates. So that's your first challenge when you look at that goal. And I think, having the goal is incredibly helpful for businesses in the first place in terms of having to meet that. But I think the challenge when you have very old estates is always your technology. So the role of technology in terms of helping achieve that is incredibly important, and in a cost-effective way for businesses as well. The other thing I'd say is the role of offsetting is very important in this conversation, because if you go with your old kit and your high carbon emissions, but then you do a lot of offsetting, that's one way to do it. From an environmental science perspective, I don't think that's a good way to do it, so I think that's really important just to bear that in mind. Really need to take control of your own challenge and resolve it.
Yeah, okay, so technology is one particular enabler. Another one I wanted to touch on, without putting any of you on the spot, is policy. It's quite a relevant time for everyone to be having this discussion, because it was just this week, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but the UK government has announced that they plan to try and halve energy usage from all buildings, new buildings from 2030. Theresa May said that new technologies and modern construction practices are going to be critical to kind of driving innovation in the sector. So it's more of a general question about the role of policy in all of this. Is there an important role to play? I mean, Victoria, representing the World Green Building Council, what's your view on kind of the role of policy here?
Sure. So actually our theory of change for the project, how we think we can reach 100% net zero carbon buildings by 2050, we put out a report last year, a call to action report that called on business, government and NGOs to take action. And our theory of change being that if we're all taking action and working in the same direction, then we'll all be able to help each other out and move that trajectory faster up to 100% of net zero carbon buildings by 2050. And so we're looking to move from individual prototype net zero energy and net zero carbon buildings into scale at portfolio level, district, region, city, national scale. And that relies very heavily on policy. And if companies are setting those goals and demonstrating corporate leadership by saying we will make our own buildings net zero carbon by a certain date, then cities need to be able to enable that process and not be a barrier to the process.
Martin, Dorothy, I mean, would you agree with that? Big role for policy to play?
From a policy perspective, I think it's incredibly important, and I'll give you an example. So I'm here today talking about House of Fraser's first BREEAM certified store, and its first new store in a long time. And it was a legal obligation for House of Fraser to comply with BREEAM in that context. So I think there's a great example of where policy makes a driver immediately, and you have to respond to that. You can then get into the conversation as to different levels of standards and are they good enough and all the rest of it. But when policy connects it in that way and has a good level, that's a really important driver.
Yeah. Anything to add on that, Martin?
Yeah, I just want to can't really add an awful lot, but I would like to come from a slightly different angle. I think policy is absolutely essential, but we see policy as a starting point. And if you think of change, who's going to drive change? Policy is not really going to drive change, people are. And I'd like to see policy being accessible and understood by users of the built environment. It's all about footfall, and it's, for us, it's, our built environment is all about place making, and if people don't want to show up to our estate, we're out of business. So we want to involve the users of the built environment a lot more and get them understanding and help them let them drive change as well. It's a great pincer movement, leadership from the corporates, but we want to include people in this journey as well.
Okay, and we talked then quite broadly around policy, around technology, around people, but I wanted to find out, particularly from the two end user kind of businesses here, I mean, what, if they were getting a bit more specific, what one kind of key factor do you think is going to be really important in reaching these net zero aims? Is there a particular technology or a particular focus?
Well, from our perspective, thinking of retail, first of all, retailers are rationalizing their estates for economic reasons because the market is tough at the moment. So that is unfortunate in one context, but it will be beneficial from an energy consumption and a carbon perspective too. And then the more you're looking at rationalization, you can look at the investment and the return you can get from technologies. And for me, I think the opportunity to leapfrog to renewables, that's where you could really get your wins in this space.
Okay, interesting.
I think we've got to look at sustainability in a new way. We're all sort of familiar with the social, environmental, economical model, but my call is that enough? You mentioned technology, and I absolutely agree with you on that. I think we have to put two things together. I think we've got to put technology and all things that drive the built environment, the design, the buildings, the way we measure energy. But I also think we need to balance that with nature. And in that I put the biodiversity, the human element, the people element, but underpinning it all, and I guess this is the galvanizing piece, this is the bit that draws it all together. It's all about leadership. And it's not necessarily just about policy or a corporate that leads this, it's about all of us taking action, all of us taking ownership in what we need to do to drive this agenda forward. And we wrap that up into a thing called making sustainability real. That's our sustainability drive.
Very good. Very well put. Health and well-being, this is an area I wanted to just quickly mention because we're talking a lot about kind of net zero carbon is one of the major things on the agenda now when we talk of green buildings, but it's an area that I guess shouldn't be forgotten and is actually quite important, very critical in this area. We've now got the WELL standard here in order to just sort of drive more health and well-being through green buildings. So I just wanted to find out, again from each of the panelists, how important a role health and well-being plays and kind of where we can see that fitting into this mix by sort of 2050. I mean, Victoria, would you like to start?
Sure. So as we're talking about net zero carbon, we're also talking about renewable energy procurement and what you can do to a building and intervene at a building level to make improvements. And so the two together is what we mean by net zero carbon. And so making improvements at a building level is very important as part of your strategy to achieving net zero carbon. And through energy demand reduction strategies and interventions, you can also achieve some really fundamental health and well-being benefits as well. There's a lot of synergies between the two, and you could see increased productivity and all sorts. There's a lot of data that's helping reinforce that fact. And as renewable energy in some markets is reaching price parity with traditional sources of energy, the other elements to the business case for net zero carbon buildings become very important. And so health and well-being is becoming especially important.
Martin, what does health and well-being look like at Canary Wharf Group?
Again, it's about footfall, and this is a great element of the sustainability agenda that gets people involved. Everybody gets health and well-being. If we start talking about carbon and zero carbon trajectories to our occupiers, some of them don't get it. But if you start talking health and well-being, everybody absolutely gets that. It's a great way to launch the conversation about other issues, about waste management and about energy. Let's start the debate with health and well-being, and let's get people involved in building a real sustainable future.
Yeah, I think all those points make great sense. Our sort of practical take on it, again thinking of this new green flagship store, we had a great opportunity to incorporate all the different elements of sustainability into it, but one of them that we incorporated was we have a 2-story high living wall, 2,000 plants, and as many other features in the store, but one of the features of the wall that there's a lot of interesting science behind is the air quality benefits and the benefits in terms of a healthy environment, not just for our staff, which is about 200 people who would work in a store like the one I'm describing, but also your customers as well. And we've seen that now the store is open about 8 months and operating about 8 months, and it's a very, very pleasant place to work, but also hopefully our customers feel also that they have a very positive experience when they go into the store.
Great stuff. Well, this has been a great chat about how we can achieve a sustainable future, achieve Mission Possible. I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on was just over here behind my shoulder. The camera won't be able to see it, but we have a big pledge wall here. So we're allowing visitors to the show to come along and take new actions to try and drive more of a sustainable future in their own organisations. We've got 2 quite big end user businesses here, or business groups here. And I guess I wanted to find out, is there any kind of new actions anyone here on this panel would like to potentially offer up for the wall following this chat?
Well, from our side, do you want to go?
No, you go first.
Okay. From our side, in a retailer, it's all about the products that you have in store and the packaging and all those kind of things. So a big focus for us at the moment is a shift to more sustainable materials, particularly in our products, whether it's sustainable cottons or low-impact materials. And it's really interesting. You have one of the exhibitors here at Edie is about taking fishing nets and converting them into mats. And we have a couple of examples of that also in fashion too. So anyway, that is an area where we're invested in. Delighted to put it also up on the wall because we have it planned out. We're on our way anyway.
Good.
As part of your focus here.
So it's an achievable pledge, or at least one that you're already on the trajectory for.
Sure.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, Martin.
Okay, so again, following on the theme of resources, we're looking at plastics. I mean, we're in Canary Wharf. We're right on the dock, so we're very close to the the waterways. We don't have a litter problem at Canary Wharf, but we are actually a point of focus for retail and offices. And we tackled coffee cups on the estate. We've just installed the first publicly available reverse vending machine in the Canary Wharf retail mall. And the thing that we're looking at right now is plastics, and we're going to be launching a campaign in the coming weeks called Breaking the Plastic Habit. So I'm going to personally pledge to break the plastic habit myself and join in with that campaign.
Great. That wouldn't be the first plastic pledge that we have on that wall, which is good. Victoria, I mean, to close us off, is there any kind of pledge the World Green Building Council would like to make? I mean, I guess is it net zero carbon by 2050 for all buildings is a pretty bold pledge already.
Quite a big pledge
is there anything else you would add, perhaps even personally?
Well, certainly a big part of my role as leading the project is to help inspire greater commitment and deeper commitment from other industries by promoting corporate leadership and listening to stories like this and going out and telling all of our members about them, and help to inspire that deeper and wider commitment so that we can recognise the wider benefits of net zero carbon buildings. we know they're possible, we know they're achievable, we absolutely know that they're necessary to achieve our targets for carbon emission reductions for the Paris Agreement, and so we'll work together to achieve that zero emissions future.
Well, there we go. Some really great, bold aims there, perfectly in line with Mission Possible. Victoria, Martin, Dorothy, thank you very much for joining us here. Good luck in your session this afternoon. I know this has been a bit of a compact Mission Possible sofa today, but yes, thank you very much. Let the green building revolution begin.